The morning sunlight slipped gently through the lace curtains of Clara's small apartment, spilling gold onto the faded wooden floorboards. It should have been a beautiful day, a celebration, a memory she'd treasure forever. But for Clara, it felt like another reminder of where she stood in her family's story, on the margins. Today was her sister Evelyn's wedding day. The text she'd received from her mother the night before still stung. "You can come if you want, but don't cause a scene." No warmth, no excitement, just a reminder to behave, to stay small, to blend in. Clara sat at the edge of her bed, fingers tracing the smooth fabric of the dress laid out before her. Navy blue, simple, elegant, and bought with the last bit of her savings. She had chosen it carefully, something that would let her appear presentable but not flashy. She wasn't trying to stand out. She just wanted to belong. But even as she smoothed the wrinkles from the fabric, a thought lingered bitterly. Even on her big day, I'm still the afterthought. Growing up, Clara had learned to live in Evelyn's shadow. Evelyn had always been the golden child, beautiful, confident, the kind of person who commanded attention the moment she entered a room. Their parents adored her, doted on her, bragged about her every achievement, while Clara's quiet successes barely earned a passing mention. It wasn't that Clara was unkind or unworthy. She was just different. Thoughtful where Evelyn was bold, hesitant where Evelyn was sure. When Evelyn got engaged to Daniel, a charming, well-connected man who seemed to have everything going for him, her parents reacted as though the family had won a prize. The engagement party had been lavish, their parents glowing with pride. Clara had stood in the corner with a polite smile, sipping her drink while listening to her mother say to a guest, "Evelyn always knew how to choose well." Clara had wondered, do I always choose poorly then? She left her apartment that morning with a pit in her stomach. The venue was a sprawling vineyard on the edge of town, surrounded by rolling hills and framed with white tents and strings of golden lights that shimmered even in daylight. Rows of flowers lined the entrance, and a faint melody of violins floated through the air. It was beautiful, painfully beautiful. The kind of place where everything was perfect except the way it made her feel. She arrived alone, clutching a small silver clutch that held her invitation. At the guest book table, she signed her name with a trembling hand and gave a small nod to the attendant, who smiled politely but seemed to recognize she wasn't one of the important guests. Inside, the reception hall was dazzling. Round tables draped in white satin, chandeliers glinting like glass rain, champagne towers catching the light. Her family was easy to spot. They sat at the long family table, placed right in the middle beneath the chandelier. Her parents were laughing with the priest. Evelyn was radiant in her ivory gown, Daniel's arm possessively around her waist. Clara scanned the table, searching for her name card. Maybe this time, just once, they had made room for her beside them. But as she walked closer, her heart began to sink. Her name wasn't there. Not beside her mother. Not beside her father. Not anywhere near the center. She stepped back, looking again, trying to convince herself she'd missed it. Then she saw it, far across the room, near the dance floor, a small table by the edge of the tent. 6 seats, none occupied yet. Her name card sat there, tucked between 2 names she didn't recognize. Distant cousins, maybe, or strangers. Her mother caught her eye from the family table. There was a brief, awkward smile, that tight, performative smile that said, "Please don't make a scene." Clara's throat burned. Evelyn didn't even glance in her direction. She forced herself to move, to sit down, to breathe. The chatter around her blurred into meaningless noise. She tried to focus on the centerpiece in front of her, a vase of white roses. But all she could think about was how she'd been excluded from the one place she should have belonged. She was family, and yet she wasn't welcome at the family table. When dinner began, the laughter from across the hall felt louder. Glasses clinked, music played, Evelyn's voice rose above the noise in cheerful bursts. Clara lifted her glass of water, she hadn't even been offered wine, and told herself to endure. Just get through it, smile, stay invisible. Is this seat taken? The voice startled her. She looked up to see a man standing beside her table. Tall, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair slightly tousled as if the wind had run fingers through it. His gray suit was neatly pressed but not ostentatious. His smile was warm but easy, the kind of smile that didn't demand attention. It invited comfort. "No," Clara said, shaking her head. "Go ahead." He sat, setting down his drink. "I'm Ethan," he said, offering his hand. "Clara." "Nice to meet you, Clara. I think there's been a mix-up. I was supposed to be at table 3, but my name card's gone missing. I think the staff might have messed up the seating chart." Clara gave a small, humorless laugh. "A mix-up seems to be the theme of the night." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That bad already? Let's just say this table isn't where I expected to be." He glanced toward the center of the room, where Evelyn's table glowed under the chandelier. "Family? Unfortunately." She took a sip of water. "I'm the sister who didn't make the highlight reel." Something in her voice must have struck him, because his smile softened. "Well," he said, "lucky me then. I prefer the unfiltered version of people anyway." She blinked, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. For the first time that evening, her chest loosened. "That's a strange thing to say at a wedding," he grinned. "I've been to too many of these. They're like stage plays, all sparkle and choreography. I like the backstage stories better." That made her laugh, quietly at first, then genuinely. It felt strange to laugh here, in a place where she'd felt so unwanted. They began to talk. He asked her about her work, her interests, and where she grew up. He wasn't making small talk. He was actually listening. She found herself opening up, cautiously at first, then more freely. She told him about her recent job loss, how her parents had barely reacted, how she'd felt invisible her whole life standing next to Evelyn. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer cliches. He just nodded, eyes steady on hers. Across the room, Clara caught sight of Evelyn looking their way. For a fleeting second, Evelyn's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly as if irritated that her forgotten sister had found something, or someone, worth smiling about. Clara looked away, but inside a quiet spark flickered. The music swelled, soft jazz drifting through the air. Plates clinked. Guests began to dance. Ethan gestured toward the floor. "Do you dance?" Clara shook her head quickly. "Not really. I'd rather not make a fool of myself." He smiled, unbothered. "Then I'll make one with you. Fair deal?" She hesitated. Then she stood. The lights dimmed, golden reflections rippling across the floor. They moved slowly, awkwardly at first, then with a rhythm that felt almost natural. Clara couldn't remember the last time she'd been this close to someone without feeling self-conscious. Ethan was patient, light-hearted, gently teasing her when she misstepped. She laughed again, and it felt real, it felt freeing. For the first time that evening, she wasn't Evelyn's sister. She wasn't the forgotten guest. She was simply Clara, a woman dancing under soft lights with someone who saw her. When the song ended, applause rose from the crowd. Clara looked toward the family table again. Evelyn was watching. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of confusion, irritation, maybe even jealousy. Clara smiled, just faintly before turning back to Ethan. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For reminding me I'm not invisible." He looked at her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You never were. You just needed someone to see it." Clara didn't know what to say to that. So she smiled, soft, genuine, and returned to her seat, her heart unexpectedly lighter. As the night went on, she noticed how easily Ethan fit into conversation, how other guests gravitated toward his calm charm. She also noticed Evelyn's glances growing sharper each time she looked their way. But Clara didn't care. For the first time in years, she wasn't chasing her family's approval. She was just existing. Later, when the music quieted and candles flickered low, Clara found herself sitting outside under the fairy lights, the cool air brushing her skin. Ethan joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He handed her one and raised his glass. "To the forgotten ones," he said with a grin. She laughed softly. and to the people who accidentally find them. Their glasses clinked. Somewhere behind them, Evelyn's laughter rang loud and practiced. Clara didn't turn to look. Tonight, she wasn't part of the family table, but she realized something. Maybe that wasn't the tragedy she thought it was. Perhaps it was her freedom. The night sky shimmered above the vineyard, and for once, Clara didn't feel like she was on the outside looking in. She was exactly where she needed to be. The night unfolded like a dream for everyone except Clara. The vineyard shimmered under strings of fairy lights, the music from the band drifting like warm honey through the air. Laughter rose from the main table where Evelyn and Daniel sat surrounded by their friends and family, basking in attention and praise. But at the far edge of the room, Clara felt herself slowly unraveling, even as she forced a smile. Ethan had stayed by her side all evening, and his company had become the one bright thing in an otherwise painful night. He had a way of speaking that felt both gentle and grounding, as if his words existed outside the noise of the party. They'd shared stories over dinner, then drifted toward the dance floor when the band began to play a slow, romantic tune. Clara wasn't used to being asked to dance, certainly not by someone like him. For a moment she hesitated, the old self-doubt flaring in her chest. But Ethan had simply extended his hand, eyes kind, no pressure, no expectation. And before she could talk herself out of it, she placed her hand in his. The lights dimmed. The air thickened with the scent of roses and champagne, and as they began to move together, Clara felt something she hadn't in years. Visible. She wasn't Evelyn's quiet sister, or the forgotten one. She was simply herself, moving softly beneath the glow of the chandeliers, her laughter mixing with his. For a moment, it was as if the entire room melted away. And then, of course, Evelyn appeared. She moved across the dance floor like a storm disguised as grace, her wedding gown glinting, her smile stretched too wide, her eyes sharp as glass. The crowd subtly parted to make way for her. "Clara," Evelyn said in that sweet, melodic tone that always made people lean in. "Could I borrow my guest for a moment?" Clara blinked, thrown off. "Your guest?" she repeated, confusion knotting her stomach. Ethan turned, eyebrows furrowing. "I'm sorry?" Evelyn's laugh was light but calculated. "Oh, didn't she tell you? Ethan's one of Daniel's friends. He's been helping with the wedding planning for weeks." The words sliced clean through the air. Clara's stomach dropped. "I didn't know that," she said softly, glancing at Ethan. Ethan frowned, visibly uncomfortable. "Actually, Daniel mentioned wanting me to meet his new in-laws, but I didn't realize you were Evelyn's sister." Evelyn tilted her head, the pearls on her earrings catching the light. "Small world, isn't it?" she said sweetly before adding, "Clara tends to keep to herself." It was a carefully wrapped insult, polite enough to pass for a joke but cruel enough to draw blood. A few guests nearby exchanged glances, chuckling under their breath. Clara could feel their eyes on her, their smirks feeding off Evelyn's tone. Heat flooded her face, and she instinctively took a step back. Before she could say anything, Ethan's expression hardened. "Evelyn," he said evenly, his voice calm but firm, "maybe you should let your sister enjoy the evening." Evelyn's smile faltered, for just a heartbeat, before she recovered it, the mask sliding back into place. "Of course," she said with that practiced laugh. "I just didn't want any confusion." Then she turned and glided away, her veil trailing behind her like smoke. The music swelled again, but the moment was broken. Clara stared at the floor, her throat tight. "I'm sorry," Ethan murmured. "That was awkward," she finished quietly. Then, with a bitter laugh, "That was basically my whole childhood condensed into 30 seconds. Ethan didn't push her to elaborate. Instead, he offered his arm and suggested they take a walk. Outside, the night was cool, the vineyard glowing faintly under a silver moon. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses faded behind them as they walked toward the edge of the property, where lanterns hung from olive trees. The air smelled faintly of grapes and distant rain. They stood there in silence for a few moments before Clara exhaled shakily. "You know what the worst part is?" she said. "I actually expected it. I knew she'd find a way to make me feel small tonight." "She always does." Ethan leaned against the wooden railing. "People like that," he said, "need the world to revolve around them. But that doesn't mean you stop spinning when they're gone." She looked at him, the corners of her lips lifting slightly. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," he said softly. "But it starts when you stop waiting for them to notice you." Clara turned her gaze toward the hills. "I used to think that one day I'd earn it. Their attention, their pride, their love. But it never mattered how hard I tried. Evelyn was always the one they bragged about. I was just extra." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his voice low when he finally spoke. "You're not extra. You're just in a family that doesn't know how to value you." His words struck something deep. For years, Clara had buried that longing. To be seen, to be enough. And now here was this stranger, seeing her more clearly in one night than her family had in her entire life. They stood there for a while, just breathing. The distant hum of the reception floated through the vines. When they eventually went back inside, the speeches had begun. Clara slipped quietly to the back of the hall, not wanting to draw attention. Ethan followed, standing beside her. Evelyn's voice filled the room, dripping with self-satisfaction. "I just want to thank everyone who made this day possible. My amazing parents, my wonderful in-laws, and of course my loving husband." She paused for effect, smiling broadly as applause rippled through the crowd. "I'm so lucky to be surrounded by such incredible people." She never mentioned Clara, not once. Clara tried to tell herself it didn't matter, that she didn't need Evelyn's validation, but it still stung, deep and quiet. Ethan must have sensed it, because when she looked at him, he gave her a small, reassuring nod. The kind that said, "You're still here, and that's enough." For a while, she almost believed it. Then came Daniel's toast. He stood, raising his glass, his grin wide and unbothered. "I just want to thank everyone again for being here tonight. Especially my beautiful wife, who's made me the luckiest man alive." Applause followed. "And a special thanks to Ethan, my good friend, who helped organize some of tonight's details. You've been like a brother to me, man. I can't wait to see you and your fiancé at our dinner next month." The words hit like a thunderclap. The laughter and chatter around the hall stopped for a split second. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. She turned slowly toward Ethan. His face had gone pale. "Fiancé?" Someone at the next table whispered. Clara felt her stomach twist. "You're engaged?" Her voice came out small, hollow. Ethan looked at her, guilt flashing in his eyes. "Clara, it's not what it sounds like." "Not what it sounds like?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "You're engaged, Ethan." He took a small step closer, his tone pleading. "It's complicated. Things haven't been right for a long time. But she didn't hear the rest. Across the room, she saw Evelyn watching her, that same subtle smirk curving her lips. And in that instant, Clara understood. Evelyn had known. She had planned this. She'd known about Ethan, known about his fiancé, and somehow, she'd made sure he ended up sitting at Clara's table. Her humiliation wasn't an accident. It was entertainment. The blood drained from Clara's face. The edges of the room blurred as laughter and whispers rose again around her. "Oh no," someone said quietly. "Poor thing." She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the hall, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing louder than the last. She didn't look back, not at Ethan, not at Evelyn, not at anyone. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and cruel. Outside, the vineyard lights blurred through her tears. She stumbled toward her car, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Behind her, the faint sound of music started up again, as if nothing had happened. As if her pain were just another background note to the perfect evening Evelyn had crafted. Clara gripped the steering wheel with trembling hands and stared through the windshield. Her reflection looked back at her, broken, humiliated, forgotten. She had been foolish to think she could exist in Evelyn's world without being crushed by it. But as she sat there, chest heaving, another feeling slowly crept in beneath the pain, something darker, sharper. steadier. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was resolved. This was the last time Evelyn would make her feel small. And though she didn't know how yet, Clara knew one thing with chilling clarity. The next time they saw each other, it wouldn't be Evelyn who controlled the story. It would be her. The days after the wedding arrived like a string of muted bells, distant and hollow. And if Clara had been the person she used to be, she might have spent them curled inside the cocoon of embarrassment, nursing the humiliation like a bruise she was afraid to touch. But the woman who drove away from the vineyard that night was not the same as the one who had stepped into it. And grief, once it cooled into clarity, organized itself into something fierce and steady, resolve. And so on the first morning she woke up without tears. She brewed coffee so strong it tasted like iron and started making a list, not of grievances or fantasies of screaming at Evelyn, but of actions, who to call, where to look, which threads to pull until the entire stage play of that night, its choreography and shining falsehoods, came apart in her hands. The point wasn't to wound but to reveal, not to mimic Evelyn's spectacle, but to turn the lights up so bright the spectacle had nowhere to hide. She began with the seating chart because humiliation often starts with small decisions disguised as logistics. She called the venue and, using her polite velvet voice, the one that made strangers want to help, she asked for the coordinator who had overseen the reception, a woman named Mara, who it turned out remembered Clara vividly. "You looked lovely in navy," she said kindly, which startled Clara with its simple human acknowledgement. And when Clara asked, softly, as if she were merely curious, how her name had migrated from the family table to the far edge of the room, she half expected a defensiveness or a shrug, but what came instead was a pause heavy with the weight of things unsaid, then a sigh, and then Mara's careful explanation. The family had insisted on handling the final print of the cards themselves, which meant the version the staff had rehearsed during the run-through wasn't the version used on the day. "And I don't want to cause trouble," Mara added, voice dipping, "but your sister made a few last-minute changes, specifically yours." And she would say no more, but she didn't have to, because Clara already knew the shape of that cruelty, its signature, neat, practiced, smiling. She thanked Mara, hung up, and dialed the florist, the band leader, the caterer, the photographer. Not once did she malign Evelyn. Not once ask for gossip. Only for facts, the way you ask for measurements when you mean to build something that won't fall apart in the rain. And facts arrived like pebbles dropping in a jar. Evelyn had demanded the florist replace an entire run of centerpieces that morning because the hydrangeas were too humble. She said humble like it was a disease, the florist confided. She made the band rescore their first dance song to shave off the melodramatic key change, but then accused them of being flat. She berated a waiter for bringing sparkling water instead of still. She instructed the photographer to avoid the navy dress when possible, and more pointedly, to catch as many shots of the family table as you can. "This is our narrative," which the photographer recalled because it was such an odd phrase, our narrative, as if love were a brochure, as if marriage were a brand launch, and if Clara had been cruel, she would have asked for those instructions in writing and posted them raw. But she had no hunger for spectacle, only for balance, and so she opened a new document titled Authentic Moments, and beneath it she wrote a mission statement in crisp, clean lines, stories that breathe the same air as the people inside them, beauty that doesn't crush the messy parts under its heel. And then she began building a small website using a template so pale it looked like a window, setting a single rule for herself as a kind of moral guardrail: no lies. No digital venom dressed up as truth. No secret recordings or doctored clips. Only what a guest's eyes could have seen if they'd dared to look away from the chandelier. And when she uploaded the first set of images, some publicly shared by guests, some she had bought fairly from the photographer as part of a family gallery, because she would not steal what she meant to sanctify, she curated them with the tenderness of someone laying out keepsakes for a child to understand their history. A shot of the caterer kneeling to pin a fallen hem on a flower girl's dress while the girl clutched a cookie. A candid of Daniel yawning, a burst of laughter from an aunt whose lipstick had wandered. A blurry moment of Evelyn mid-command, mouth tight around a syllable like a blade. None of it cruel. None of it doctored, all of it simply stubbornly real. She titled the set "The Truth Beneath the Veil," not as accusation but as thesis, and she wrote a caption that said, "Perfection is heavy. The good parts can breathe under honest light." It would have been nothing, just a small gallery on a small site in a loud world, if not for the way honesty travels when people are starved for it. A bridesmaid reshared the link, then a cousin, then a local wedding. Blogger who wrote a short piece about how the most moving photos from this extravagant wedding are the ones where everyone forgot to pose, and within a week the gallery had been viewed tens of thousands of times, strangers commenting less on the gown and more on the way a ring-bearer slid off his chair to curl against his grandmother's side. And though there were a handful of comments that misread the intent, searching for scandal like pigeons pecking for glitter, Clara refused to feed them. Instead, she posted a statement clarifying that the gallery was a love letter to the people who make events human. The planners and florists and waiters, the nervous cousins who smudge their eyeliner crying. And because she framed it as gratitude, the vendors, hungry like everyone else, to be seen, found her, wrote to her, thanked her, asked if she would cover their next jobs with the same tenderness, and a few asked if she offered planning services herself because anyone who could see like that could surely plan like that. And Clara, who had never allowed herself the fantasy of standing at the helm of anything other than her own disappointment, said yes before fear had time to vote. Somewhere inside that first bright surge, Ethan wrote, the email arrived at dawn, 2 sentences at first. I owe you an apology. May I speak with you? And because the night at the vineyard had already been dissected, thread by thread, until its knots were visible even to the gentlest eye, she agreed to meet him in a quiet cafe on a street that smelled of bread and old books. When she walked in, he stood too fast, nearly toppling his chair, his face stripped of the airy charm that had made him so easy to like. And what replaced it wasn't contrition polished for effect, but something plain, almost boyish, remorse. He did not deflect or perform the alchemy of excuses. He simply told her the truth in a paragraph so unembellished it felt like a confession said into a wooden booth. He had been engaged to Daniel's cousin. Yes, but it had unraveled months earlier and lingered in that gray zone where families cling to the version of news that hurts least. And he had allowed the comfort of ambiguity to carry him right into a night where ambiguity would behave like a trap. He said he should have told her the moment they sat down, that he felt an ease with her that startled him precisely because there was no game in it, and he had wanted, greedily, to keep the ease without doing the work of honesty. And then Daniel had poured gasoline on it with his toast, because men like Daniel often believe the world is an extension of their introductions, the truth arriving only when they announce it. Clara listened without interrupting, the way he had listened to her under the olive trees. And when he finished, she told him, without drama, that she believed him, not because she wanted to be fooled, but because the story felt ordinary. And ordinary, she had learned, was where truth lived most comfortably. She said his failure that night had been real and it had cut her, but it was not the same as Evelyn's orchestration, which had been deliberate, almost architectural, and unlike him, Evelyn had never met a mirror she didn't try to dazzle rather than study. They stepped into a new arrangement, not romance. Not yet. Not anything that demanded a name. Just 2 people sending each other small courage in the form of links and jokes and the occasional long silence where neither felt compelled to fill the air with apology. He sent her a book about hospitality that treated guests like souls rather than metrics. She sent him a playlist that sounded like linen drying on a line. And as the weeks widened, her site evolved into an offering. Packages for intimate events with honest schedules that calculated in time for crying, crumbs, a broken heel. Vendor lists with notes like, brings snacks for nervous, brides, and knows when to turn the mic down so the toast can breathe. And inquiries began to bloom, not just from the city but from nearby, towns where weddings were less stage and more supper. Evelyn, meanwhile, reacted like someone discovering a hairline crack in the mirror she used to confirm her existence each morning. First came the text to Clara, curt, imperial. Take down those photos. They're unflattering. And when Clara explained that nothing was unflattering about human moments, that she'd posted nothing private, that the attention wasn't mockery but relief, Evelyn's replies inflated into the tone she reserved for people she perceived as help. "You're embarrassing us. Remove them now." And when commands didn't work, she tried pity. "You're confused, and I don't want to see you dragged online." And when pity failed, she used the instrument she had always tuned best, parental disappointment. She sent their mother to call, and their mother called with the soft sigh that had colored so much of Clara's childhood. The one that asked her to be understanding without ever asking Evelyn to be kind. And Clara, who had once folded under that sigh like paper in rain, did not fold now. She told her mother gently that she loved her, but would not pack away her own dignity so Evelyn could travel lighter. She suggested, politely, astonishingly even to herself, that perhaps the family could withstand a little honest wind. And then she ended the call, not abruptly but firmly, and sat for a long time in the quiet of her apartment, noticing how silence can feel like a room with windows thrown open. The backlash Evelyn anticipated did not come because the gallery, framed as gratitude, refused to host a riot. Instead, something stranger happened. People began sending in their own truth-beneath-the-veil photographs, crooked cakes that tasted like childhood, dogs asleep under buffet tables, a great-grandmother's dress mended by 5 pairs of hands the night before a ceremony, along with notes about how they had felt small and then felt suddenly, inexplicably loved. Clara curated those too, and soon she was less the author of a single wedding's aftermath and more the steward of a small movement, one that treated celebration as a room where accidents were not shameful but sacred. When a local magazine asked to profile her, she said yes with the caveat that the piece center the vendors. Her insistence startled the editor into respect. And the article, when it ran, placed her at a round table with florists and dishwashers and band leaders, laughing in the middle of a sentence, the headline simple as a vow, "Let it be real." In the photograph, there was no chandelier, only a window, and late afternoon pouring through it like approval. The piece did what glossy pieces do. It gave her business a second wind, inquiries doubling, then tripling. And with them a decision she once would have avoided. She scaled carefully, hiring a shy genius named Priya to manage timelines, and a retired seamstress named Alba, who could rescue any zipper with the serenity of a surgeon. She instituted policies that looked like love in policy's clothes. Vendor meals guaranteed, water handed before panic bloomed, a small fund in every budget to handle the unexpected without shame. One afternoon, weeks into this new velocity, a package arrived. A small square of velvet containing a pendant shaped like a compass, silver and quiet. The note inside was from Ethan, for the woman who built her own North. And though gifts had often felt to Clara like debts disguised as ribbons, this one felt like an acknowledgement, a map folded small enough to carry in a palm. She did not kiss him then or declare anything dramatic. The next time they saw each other, they ate noodles standing at her counter, and he washed the bowls, and she stood behind him and smiled because some revolutions make no noise at all. As for Evelyn, cracks widened. The influencer partnership she had engineered around her wedding faltered when the brand, scenting the wind, asked to pivot the campaign toward authenticity, which to Evelyn's ear sounded like an insult. She hosted a dinner to reclaim the narrative, and it was fine, glossy, forgettable, and to her astonishment, their parents did not scold Clara for her success but began, in hushed ways, to ask her things, what flowers wouldn't die in heat, how to arrange chairs so shy relatives could slip away with dignity, whether a toast could be submitted as a story rather than a resume. And while they did not apologize in a speech as dramatic as the wedding had been, they did quieter, truer things. Their mother saved clippings about Clara's business in a kitchen drawer. Their father, gruff and allergic to earnestness, texted her a link to a folding dolly and wrote, "Might be useful," which in his dialect translated to, "I see you pushing weight and want your back to survive it." The apology that mattered when it arrived came wrapped in an imperfection that made it beautiful. Evelyn showed up at Clara's office holding a bouquet that looked like it had fought its way through a storm. Tulips listing like overturned boats, and she hovered in the doorway, not as a queen deigning to enter, but as a girl who had lost her map. She did not drop to her knees or beg. Instead, she asked, in a voice that had misplaced 2 inches of its height, whether Clara might help her plan a small family gathering for their parents' anniversary. No photographers, no curated doilies, just dinner and maybe a game of cards, and something in the request. Its uninstagrammable humility undid a knot in Clara she had presumed permanent. She said yes with conditions: no seating chart shenanigans, no speeches with pointed omissions, and Evelyn would chop onions with the same tears as everyone else. And Evelyn, to her credit, said okay. The dinner, when it came, glowed with the kind of warmth that never trends, their father teaching a nephew to shuffle until the cards purred like a small engine, their mother telling a story about a broken heater in the first apartment that ended not in moral, but in laughter, Ethan arriving late with a burn on his thumb from caramelizing onions and taking good-natured teasing for it. At the end of the night, Evelyn stood beside Clara at the sink, both of them wrist-deep in sudsy water, and said, not dramatically, not like a line in a film, but as if placing a pebble on a windowsill, "I'm sorry I made you small so I could feel big. And it was not enough to erase the years. But it was accurate, and accuracy, Clara had learned, was a beginning. When she went home, she hung the compass on a small hook by her door. She didn't wear it often because she didn't need to. North was no longer a direction someone else could hide from her. It was a practice made of 1,000 small refusals to lie, to others, but especially to herself. In the end, her revenge was not flames but oxygen. She had not burned Evelyn down. She had opened windows until the smoke cleared, and everyone, even Evelyn, could see where they were standing. And the strangest, simplest consequence of that clarity was joy. The quiet, daily kind. Lists that left room for surprise. Clients who cried because someone had planned for their humanity. A man who asked questions as if answers were treasures and who, one spring evening months later, took her hand on a sidewalk lit with cheap cafe bulbs and said without tremor, "I don't want to be careful with you anymore." And she, laughing, said, "Then don't." And if there were still days when old ghosts rang the bell and asked to be let back in, memories of the family table, of a name card blinking like a low battery at the edge of a room, she would pour coffee, strong enough to taste like iron, and open the windows, and the bells would sound far away again. And under the ordinary light of morning, she would return to her work, arranging chairs and time and tenderness so that no one seated alone would ever feel like an afterthought. And if a stranger appeared at their table, it would be because there was room, not because someone had been moved aside to make a better picture.